Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the very last event today before the end of day one. Just a quick intro. My name is Benjamin Bathke. I'm a freelance journalist. I cover tech and startups, among other things. And just a fair warning, I've never moderated a panel before, so just to manage expectations. I have a question for you, maybe just to get things started. I'm sure you're still awake, but does anybody know what this stage is supposed to resemble? Just shout it out. Does anybody know? Because they've put a lot of thought into this, and I just wanted to acknowledge this beautiful stage setting. Does anybody know? Yes, it's Bolivia, right. So it's supposed to resemble the Bolivian salt flat, the world's largest, in fact. Its name is Salar de Uyuni, and the way I understand is when it rains, the surface mirrors the sky. So I think we've all seen it in pictures, but just kind of as an attempt for an icebreaker. So the topic of this panel is open data and AI. And I'm very excited to be here with these four gentlemen. All of them have a lot to say about this topic. You've already seen Romain earlier in his talk. He's the co-founder of Terra Expeditions. So why open data and AI? Well, data has been called the new oil of the digital economy by Wired. And The Economist said that data also replaced oil as the world's most valuable resource. And data is also at the core of hotly debated issues in the last few weeks, but also months and years going back around privacy and regulation and Facebook and manipulation and such. So, but obviously then, data doesn't equal open data. So just allow me to quickly share a definition of what this open data movement is. And it's the idea that some data should be freely available to everyone to use and republish as they wish without restriction from copyright, protection, or other mechanisms of control. So, and obviously the way this relates to AI is AI relies on huge amounts of data to analyze. And then the last few years, it's become more prominent as computing power has reached a point to where AI can actually process this huge amount of data. So with that, again, we're talking about open data, and I wanted to kind of start this panel. We have about 40 minutes, and in the end, we've reserved about 5 minutes for questions from the audience. So if you want to submit a question to our esteemed panelists, you can do that by going to Slido. That would be fantastic, so we can add some variety to the discussion. But why don't we start things off by just going around and just having all four of you introduce yourselves, briefly tell me and the audience what you do and how it relates to open data and AI.
So, hi, I'm Renaud, so I'm CTO of Earthcube. And so at Earthcube, we do AI and on geospatial data to serve different types of clients and to solve to monitor, in fact, critical assets for industrial, government, or environment. And how do we use open data? First thing is we started working with satellite imagery, and satellite imagery used to be very expensive and very rare and very difficult to access. But thanks to Copernicus and ESA program, we had open data satellite imagery access, which was revolution. And so as a small startup, when we were 2 or 3 people, we could access terabytes of data to train our AI without having to pay a dime. And that was amazing. So it was the first use we had of open data, which is still now ongoing for months. So.
Good. Maybe in order, so we don't have to pass the mics around.
My name is Romain Troublé. I am the director of the non-profit foundation, Terra Expeditions, in France. And we are working with basic science research, mainly. And so when we talk about open data, we are producing data a lot, both by sampling the planet, but also by doing analysis on the samples, genomics images. We are generating a lot of data in these data sets, and for the common understanding of our planet, how it works, and how it behaves, and how we may be able to predict the changes in the future. And for me, open data, when it talks about data from the planet, data from marine life, you are also dealing with rules, international rules, United Nations rules of who the data belongs, where the species has been taken. All these rules are going along the data set as is open, but there are rules also to respect when you use the data in a way, whether it is for data analysis, data science, AI training, or other topics. So open data is, as you said, is completely free of rules. Mm-hmm. It is. But there's also another version of open data where you have some rules going with the data users.
And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but let's just finish the intro round.
Hello, everybody. So my name is André Loesekrug-Pietri. Actually, I would have loved to have open data when I went to the Sala for uni. That was some time ago. That was 15 years ago. And at that time, weather information was not shared. We went in August, and we forgot that in the southern hemisphere in August, it's minus 25 in Uyuni at night. So that was kind of a painful experience. Remembering that.
Something to bear in mind.
So I'm the speaker for the Joint European Disruptive Initiative. It's called J.E.D.I. It's an initiative which has been started a year ago, which led to several European countries, including this country, to launch the equivalent of the DARPA in the US, basically an agency investing in moonshots, topics which are too risky or too long-term for the private sector, but that we can feel will become critical in the next 5 or 10 years. And obviously, the role of data and the role and how Europe can not just lament itself that it doesn't have big platforms and how can it invent the next big thing is core to our mission. So we launch grand challenges. Happy to describe a little bit those who are linked with open data, but I give you just one. I mean, we talk a lot about these huge databases in defense or in healthcare, where we rightly so in Europe prevent the usage because we think it can be reverse engineered to either defense information or personal healthcare information. One of the challenges we will launch is, can we create avatars, some people call it homomorphic encryption, of these data sets that can allow us to do machine learning on it, but without, so it's open, but we prevent reverse engineering. We also think that big data is an invention of the big platforms. Our kids don't learn with big data. So can we launch a challenge where we basically teach robots like kids with smaller amount of data? So it's a twist to the topic of open data, but we think in Europe we need to invent our new way. Otherwise, the risk is that we always run after the others.
Thank you. And last panelist is?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pierre-Philippe Mathieu. I'm working at the European Space Agency in a lab called the Phi-Lab. It's an innovation lab looking at new solutions on how to use the data. Our core business is to build and launch satellites, and we have a lot of satellites called the Sentinel, which are monitoring the planet as we speak, a 10-meter resolution all the time, and all this data is for free. So we have petabytes of data for free for you to use and to develop applications, to understand what's happening on the planet, to create new services with geoinformation. And we believe, that's why I'm sitting here, that machine learning and AI is one of the key tools to actually mine this big data. And we also believe in open data, which is democratization of information. We need to know what's happening on the planet. Now we have the data to do this. We need to transform it into information.
All right. Thank you. Pierre-Philippe, let's stay with you for this next thing, just because people have just heard about what you do in the last 30 seconds, so it's still fresh in their minds. So you're on a mission to spread this data that you collect with Copernicus and these Sentinel satellites to unleash people's creativity on it, basically. So you're enabling people with that data that they can then create new business models around it, right? So can you just describe some of the use cases that you have enabled, businesses, etc., how people have used this data in the last few years? Because I've read that Copernicus might create, or that's the expectation or the hope, correct me if I'm wrong, by 2030, 48,000 jobs, thanks to that open sharing of data. So I think that's extremely, to try to make it a little bit more tangible, how
Yes.
open data actually works.
Okay, so I can maybe explain why I'm still fascinated by this business even after 15 years. It's just because the potential of this data is infinite. It basically touches everybody, all the verticals of industry. You always need information on the state of the environment to make educated decisions in your business or in your science. So you can imagine that you can create a lot of jobs in terms of knowledge society by transforming this data into services. The difficulty to do that is that we're in the big data era. So our job as an agency is to lower the barrier of entry for entrepreneur, innovator, to actually have a go at this data, to use machine learning to create indicators that they then can sell to someone else. And this application touches literally all industry. There was some demonstration of startups on renewable energy industry. You can monitor solar radiation from space, understand where to put your renewable plant, optimize it, siting it, make a business plan for investor to know how much energy you would do. You can work with the ocean to understand where to preserve the fish, what is the phytoplankton quantity, help prevent deforestation. So basically, I need more time to go through all the application, but the idea here is that anybody who has a good idea about delivering a service to a user would need some of this data. And what we try to do is to provide the tools, the infrastructure, because we cannot send 10 petabytes to people. We create platforms now where we move these people on the platform. We give them the tool for free so that they can process it, they can prototype it rapidly, and we want to educate them on how to use machine learning with this data. So,
speaking of prototype, André, I think that's something we talked about earlier as we prepared for this panel, is that you're looking for breakthrough technologies and you're trying to get them to build a prototype, or they already have a prototype. Correct me if I'm wrong. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that process and how open data helps with that and building a prototype, and just in terms of your work with these with the scientific discoveries and these startups also.
I mean, look at what has just been said, and I think this is exactly the fundament. And when you look at the data amount that Sentinel and Copernicus is sending out of it, the question is this is raw data. We can actually expand the topic of the fact that most of the information that we are now facing in our everyday life, be it email, be it social media, etc. The problem is not anymore the availability of data, is how are you able to label it and to organize it and to structure it. So our mission is to say, in Europe, we absolutely need very quickly to develop breakthrough technologies that allow a better usage of this data. And so we focus on launching grand challenges, making sure that we don't only focus on SMEs or only on startups or only on corporates, putting the whole ecosystem under positive tension, no geographical return, and that only excellence wins. And we rather focus on taking decisions in a couple of weeks and then being very demanding on the results, rather than doing very long research projects which take years, where very often we too much focus on the selection and not on the outcome. For us, the importance is that in Europe, where we have put, I think, 4 billion in Copernicus and 12 or 13 billion in Galileo, we don't just create the infrastructure for the big platforms, but we also transform it into use cases and prototypes. So the bridge we are trying to do is to say we need disruptive technology because we cannot just follow. The margins are concentrating increasingly on the leaders, but we need to bring these breakthrough technologies not to a research paper which frankly nobody funds in Europe. And no VC or no business angel will put a lot of money. But we bring it to a prototype that works, that then the industrials in the room, the startups can then scale and make unicorns. And all this needs to happen much faster than what we're doing today. Because as you know, speed is as important, if not more important than money. So this obsession on prototype obviously creates a lot of backlash. A lot of scientists say it's not possible. Actually, if you put big money in it, huge pressure, and total freedom of research, you can achieve incredible results.
Romain, would you agree with this statement? That if you just put enough money, where you throw enough money at it, then something good will come out of it?
J.E.D.I is pretty rare, in fact. J.E.D.I is pretty rare, I mean, on the market. I mean. We are at the stage of gathering all this data, make them, analyzing them, giving all the genomics, metatranscriptomics, images, data all together integrated. But there's a lot of work to do still to make them available to the users that are outside the community of biologists or oceanographers or biogeochemists to use them in other applications.
Right.
We got a request of, I mean, this is basic science, but we got a paper in Science last year using our data that we produced. When I say I say the scientists involved with the foundation. And they were asking a question of the origin of the bacteria in the evolution time that make the mitochondria in the cells of people to breathe, you know? They were looking for the first one bacteria that was embedded in a cell. A question we never had before when we started the project. But they found out in our data how to tackle it, but they spent 2 years to find out where to look and what to ask, in which tools, and there's no tool yet. So we are now in the process of trying to organize this to the community.
Right, so
the business to
in
use
other
it.
words, what you trying to point out is there's a difference between open data, which is raw, and open access data, which is already refined or actionable, as we call
labeled,
it, right? Labeled,
organized, with
services
that goes along with the data.
Yeah.
What Copernicus has done already, that they build the services with it. For all the data from the ocean I talk about, which is a huge data set as well, and a very heterogeneous data set. We are in this stage now.
One of the pro-arguments of the open data movement is that scientific research, the discovery rate goes up. So can you talk about that at all, kind of to make it a bit more tangible in terms of how open data actually helps with scientific discoveries if you make it not just available but also actionable?
I mean, the ocean is so big. There is so much into it we don't know. There's a huge, there's work for the humanity there to find out clues, patterns, understand new questions, new answers to any question you have on the processes of this planet, how this is working, how this magic of life is working on this planet. This is a huge endeavor, and that requires us to share as much as possible. In basic science, you are obliged to publish your data when you publish a paper. But usually you publish a part of your data that you use to make the paper. But people need to have access to it as much as we can,
right?
To initiate innovation and to innovate for other questions of tomorrow.
Yeah. All right, so I want to turn to Renaud, founder of Earthcube. We talked about space, we talked about biodiversity or the environment. Renaud, so you have 3 kind of business verticals, right? Economic intelligence, security and environment, and defense. So maybe you can talk about some of the limitations of open data in those 2, especially in defense, where the limitations and how you can overcome those limitations.
Of course. I just want to add just something about labeling and open data. Just give you a practical use case we had. So we had a development organization in Asia who was asking us to map roads. So because in fact there is some country you don't know where the roads are, what are the state of the road, and do people have access to basic communication, and we used terabytes of Sentinel data for free, and we use for labelization some OpenStreetMap, which are also open data, to label some area where OpenStreetMap is correct, which are free map, in fact, like Google Map, but for free. And so to train an algorithm and to map the whole South Asia, and it took us like 2 months. And the data were free. And without Copernicus program, without OpenStreetMap, it would have cost us 100 million euros. And that's not possible to afford. And so if you were done by hand and not an AI, it was like 15 years. So that's how it can really help people in the end, because at the end, for 2 months of work, you have the whole map of all the road in South area, and that's it. So in defense, get back to your question, what I found really interesting is usually when you talk to defense or some security or some even like big company which have sensitive data, and you talk of this open data and AI, they say, okay, I'm very open to AI, but I'm not going to give you my data. I'm not going to give you what type of data I use, where am I using it, and even what it looks like. But thanks to open data, you have some proxies. You can use this data, you can label tremendous amount of data, open data for very cheap price. And after you have an AI and algorithm that you can deploy on-premise at the client, at the defense or client or industrial client, where you can use its data if it's close enough. So if you take satellite imagery, the spy satellites are not the same than the Sentinel satellite. But in fact, it's still satellite imagery. And so if you train on commercial or open satellite imagery, you are not far away from what they have, in fact. And so they can, with a very tiny amount of work compared to what you put in, have an AI which do the same work that they would have done if they had used open data. Right. So that's very powerful, with AI, that you really leverage open data even in community who don't want to use them.
Right. André, before you answer, is that what you just described? Is that transfer learning, or is that
Yeah, that's a method to do that.
Just to put a name, to label it. Transfer learning.
Yes, it's transfer learning. So you can, in fact, transfer the knowledge from a data set to another data set. So if you have learned how to detect cat on cell phone images, it's much more easier after to learn how to detect dog.
Right. So
on the same type of images or different images.
So would you say that transfer learning then is one of the ways to overcome one of the drawbacks of open data, one of the challenges, which is that it's very cost intensive and time consuming?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Okay, right. Do you want to say something? Yeah?
No, I just wanted to add, I mean, I did a short stint at the cabinet of the French defense minister, and I remember there was a lot of discussion about the data we can use. Right now, it's more or less public information. We use 20% of the data, for example, that we have in the Sahel region. We will as soon have optic component satellites. We will probably multiply by 10. So if we don't change anything, we will only exploit 2% of the data. And then there's always the question, can we share it or not? And if we keep restricting it to people with high security clearance, the risk is that obviously we don't make use of it. And you can ask yourself the question, when a fighter jet goes over, I don't know, Mali, somewhere today, it's probably secret. What happened 3 weeks ago should be released. And so there's a very interesting trend even within the ministry to kind of change the way data is seen, and that data that 3 weeks ago should actually be shared because it brings incredible benefit. And then a bit of provocative point. We always think with GDPR in Europe we are safe. I'm a big fan of GDPR, but let me give you this use case about open data. Right now you have the government of Guangdong in China who is going around the world and saying, we give you open data about our 80 million biodata we have on our population. It's the large southern region of China. And so every kind of biotech company, AI biotech company, can train its algorithm on 80 million people. They don't need to comply with GDPR because it's outside of the European Union. But this company with these kind of, okay, the metabolism of Chinese and European might be slightly different, but these companies will have algorithms who will beat everybody in Europe. So we have always to be careful that, yes, we protect, but it's not the ultimate protection. So we need to be smart about how we share this data that we have here in Europe.
Right.
That's funny. I just want to add just one thing on the classification. We have seen one of the American, one American head of intelligence agency saying that, okay, we have to be honest, if we only look at classified data, we are the last to know. Because people on Twitter, on Facebook, they know before, in fact, sometimes classified information. So that's a funny.
Right, Pierre, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, just to piggyback on this point, I wanted to say that open data is beautiful data. It's really beautiful.
What do you mean?
Every,
From outer space?
You
or
need,
from
you
everywhere?
need open data.
Right.
It has been demonstrated that progress in science are related to how you share data, etc. This is a no-brainer. This is the invention of printing. When you share information, you grow, you build more knowledge. It has also been demonstrated that when you release data for free, like the GPS, rather than selling a GPS information, you decide, I give it for free, but suddenly you create a new market, which is the downstream market using GPS to create new information services. If it were not for free, this downstream market would not be as big as it is today. But open data is often associated with free data, but I have to recall that it comes with a cost. First, there is an infrastructure behind to generate this data, where you had to invest, and also you need extra efforts, because if everything is open, you need to be educated on how to search for the right data. Because if you put your stuff in Google, you will have like 10 data sets of CIs, but maybe 9 are not accurate. So you need to enhance this data with metadata, accuracy bar, etc., and educate people on how to use it properly. Otherwise, you live in misinformation, which is surprising. You have more and more information, but you actually misinform because you cannot digest it. So I want to stress that it's very important also to focus on this. Otherwise, we will be misled in our decision. And what we try to do in different agencies, including ESA, is actually to ensure traceability of this data, integrity, to have community of scientists reviewing it and putting accuracy measurements on top of it so that people can make educated decisions.
Okay, thanks for that. We have about 10 minutes left before we turn to your questions. So another reminder for you to, if you have a question, please do submit them on Slido. We look forward to answering them in about 10 minutes' time. I wanted to ask you about something, I think you talked about it just briefly, André, that it's just that 2%, you said something about 2% is being used. Correct me if I'm, do you recall what you said about 2%?
I said that from the observation information from drones or satellites we have on the Sahel region, only 20% is exploited.
Only 20%, okay, right. So that
It will turn to 2% with the new satellite generation, which will increase data amount by 10.
Okay. And in this context, I did some research. So the Open Data Institute and Deloitte, they conducted a study that found that the UK stands to lose £15 billion by 2025 if it does not improve data sharing. So that could be anything from geo-related data or mobility. So is anybody of you really if can address that, kind of the needs for economies, countries to stay or become more competitive, to make open data more accessible and also actionable. So kind of the business case for open data, if somebody can comment on that, maybe you or somebody else.
Yeah, for us as a company, it's a no-brainer, like having this data. As I said, if you had to buy those or even proxy of those, often it's so expensive that it's not even like a question you ask yourself. So it open, you say GPS, I've heard something about GPS, that it was one of the best investment ever because it was open, so the amount of job and wealth creation and in terms of also safety, in terms of science, in terms of everything, it's unimaginable. So I think for a company, for AI company are developing because of the technology, so everybody, the AI is new, etc. Yes, but also because of the open data policy. Without that, there will be no AI company.
Right. So UK has more bigger things to worry about than Brexit.
Sorry? Yeah.
So just to compare that, UK stands to lose 40 billion a year if it leaves European Union. So that's more than double, not twice than that, as it stands to lose if it doesn't make data open. But still, it gives you an idea of how much a boost for the economy, private sector, also this could be. Just to kind of put this into context. Another point I want to talk about.
Can I be a bit provocative
ahead,
here?
yeah.
Because yes, it's great to chant, and I agree with everything you said. It's great to chant that open data is fantastic, but are we having the same tools? Because I suppose that our friends at Facebook, Google, and Apple are also very actively looking at Copernicus data. And I'm not sure that the US government paid for that infrastructure. Do we really have companies who are at the same level? Because in order to process, how much is Copernicus producing every day?
16 terabytes?
60 terabytes. Do you have the computing power? Do you have the cloud infrastructure in order to process that? So I think we have been a little bit naive in Europe of saying, yes, we provide this free infrastructure. Are we giving ourselves also the tool to create, then the downstream companies like yours or others who are going to create value? Because you said it very right. The data is free, but the value is created with the usage and the use cases we're going to use. So I think that we have to be a bit careful, because the advance that these companies are taking, and if they mix geolocalization with consuming habits, with Waze information, it's extremely powerful. Mm-hmm. And GDPR actually puts today a cap. That means it makes the barrier of entry for those who want to create the same actually more difficult than the incumbents. Right. It's a provocative question. I don't know what you think about it.
I need to give a provocative answer.
Yes? Go for it.
No, I think any threat comes with an opportunity. So it's clear that Europe has not the big ICT giant that we see in US or in China now. So we are really at a crossroad here, and we're just looking. So it's important that our masters understand that there is intelligence in Europe. I was talking to a colleague about quantum computing. Quantum has been invented here. It's now taking over in China. There is some pole of excellence in Europe to do things. So we have seeds here, but we don't have the economy of scale to actually make the most of it. And as usual in life, when something is open, it's the fastest which gets the cake. So the message is open data is beautiful, but please run fast. And when we see companies like Earthcube, I was just discussing with Renaud before, it's important. We went to the Silicon Valley and we saw these new companies coming up on the AI wave, and they are getting big investment from venture capitalists. And in Europe, there is a risk-adverse approach. We were talking about the lower level of venture that you get. But there is excellence, there is knowledge. So it's not up to me or to you. It's up to really have a big move. Maybe your big challenge can be a step in this direction to have this capability to fuse in terms of a European capability. And again, we have elements of infrastructure. The other big guys, they have such an economy of scale which makes the cost extremely small. So, but we can focus on the applications because they are focusing on something else. And we can put all our intelligence in the downstream application and be competitive. So again, this threat can be an opportunity if we focus in the right direction.
Okay. Thanks, Pierre. One last point I wanted to bring up before we turn to the audience is because I think, André, you mentioned the tech giants, and who have obviously become one of the main reason or a major reason why they've become so powerful is because they've amassed a tremendous amount of data. So they wield all this power because they know how to sell this data to advertisers, etc., and to do these things. So obviously, as you've probably all noticed in the last few weeks and months, there's been a lot of talk about regulating the tech giants and possibly breaking them up, but definitely kind of limiting their power. So in Germany, As a matter of fact, a so-called data for all law was proposed not too long ago, which would kind of force those monopolies, which I guess you can call them, to release the data, especially what's considered public property data, such as locations or mobility. So just wondering if any one of you could comment on that, how that could help making that data, the massive amounts of data that these companies, the big 7, 10 cents of the world, Apple and Facebook, how part of that data, making that open access could help, but also kind of some of the challenges, because the tech companies themselves have violated data laws in the past, and so that might not be as simple as just to tell them by law, make this data available. So, maybe Arnaud?
So maybe I can give also a provocative answer. So when it's free, you are the product. So Google, Facebook, they release lots of open stuff, but they never do it for free. So if you think about AI, all the framework are open and most of their data. This is because you are tend to use their infrastructure, their cloud. And so you spend your money, your real money, because what it has been said, what really costs in AI is computing power. This is really costly. And so when you are locked in Google, you use their infrastructure and you pay for it. And that's normal, that's a commercial service. But in terms of naivety, we have to be careful and not to be naive with this kind of data policy, because I have a commercial company. If I release something for free, it's to make money after on another or part of the company. And that's normal, that's how a company works. A company is here to make money. So maybe for research, it's a good, it's a good thing for research, because researchers can use this data usually for free and to improve, in fact, science for all. So it's usually good public relation for the company. I don't know what you think. All
right, we have 5 minutes left, so let's see if we got any questions from the audience. Looks like we do. So Chrissy, okay, I thought they were a bit shorter, but is there any question for Romain, maybe, because I want to kind of bring him back into the conversation. It doesn't, Romain, is there any question you can answer? Then feel free to pick one. If not,
on the biodiversity.
Can you repeat the question that you're answering?
Maybe. I don't know the C maybe, but I'm not a specialist of medicine data, but I mean health data.
Health data, yeah.
But on the biodiversity aspect of data, today there is a convention called the Nagoya Protocol for the Convention of Biodiversity.
Let me just the Nagoya Protocol, which is of the official name, is the Nagoya Protocol on Access to Genetic Resources and the Fair and Equitable Sharing of Benefits Arising from the Utilization, to the Convention on Biological Diversity. That's a handful. In short, the Nagoya Protocol.
So that is a UN regulation to use the data from the marine life or organisms or plants, or seed from a country, to make a business out of it, and to make sure that the company that does that will pay the country back, okay? But this has been developed over the last 20 years with people who don't know really what is the data, what is a digital sequence of DNA, what we talk about. And so we came up with a plan and with a rule that is barely inapplicable. In fact, in the operational way, it's very hard to apply these UN convention rules. And now we are talking at the UN, the only treaty that we negotiate now at the UN level is to discuss what we're going to do with the data that comes from the high seas. High seas belongs to you, to anyone, and to nobody. It's a place of the planet that we have no rule today. And this is again the case. What we do with the data and how these data, when they are used, will benefit the entire world community. That is a question on top.
Thanks. I think we might have time to answer one more question. What about the ethics of AI? Is there anybody? Maybe you, André? In terms
I'm going
of
to
our
make a
J.E.D.I?
similarity with privacy.
Sure.
We invented GDPR. Contrary to what a lot of people thought, it actually becomes a standard globally. People talk about it in the US, talk about it in China. But which was the first company that actually applied it and removed the API between its contact book and its apps? It's iPhone. It's Apple in June 2018, a month after GDPR was enacted. So what we need to do in Europe is to go beyond creating the legal or physical infrastructure for data, but is actually understanding that we have been in advance in many terms, but we need to turn this. So ethics is going to be something that is important for everybody. I don't think a Chinese or American will drive a car without having explainability behind the AI protocol. I mean, you heard Trump's tweet this morning, which is lunaire, as we say in French, as always, saying, oh, I would never fly a plane, relating to the tragic Ethiopian case, where a machine takes the decision by me. But actually, it's a very interesting statement. It basically says, if we don't explain AI, or if we don't explain that the decisions which have been taken are following some ethical or logical grounds, people will tend not to use it. And I think it's an opportunity for Europe to turn its probably moral advance, I know I'm not very politically correct to say that, at least its values advance into real business. We cannot just be the guys who are talking about cleaning the planet, and then the Chinese are producing the batteries and the solar panels. But that's happening right now.
All right, thanks. I think that's a good point to end on. And I think we're officially out of time. So maybe that's an area where Europe could have a leg up compared to the US or also China. Ethics is definitely something that in terms of AI and biases of algorithms, etc., that is definitely important. So maybe Europe can lead the way in that regard. So thanks for your attention and have a wonderful rest of the evening. And we will all see you back tomorrow morning for day 2. Thank you very much.